For the last 2,000 years, Christians have tried to identify the Antichrist. Napoleon was called the Antichrist, Hitler was called it, Stalin, various popes, and even a few American presidents. Every generation has seemed to be convinced that they've finally figured it out. And yet every generation has been wrong so far. And at some point, that pattern should make us stop and ask a different question. Because maybe the problem isn't that we keep choosing the wrong person. Maybe we've been asking the wrong question altogether. Because when you actually read the Bible carefully, the Antichrist isn't described the way most people think. And here's the detail that catches almost everybody off guard. The word Antichrist never actually appears in the book of Revelation. Not a single time. So where does it actually appear? And what does the Bible actually say? Let's take a look. The word Antichrist only shows up 5 times in the entire New Testament. And every single reference comes from the letters of 1 John and 2 John. Not Revelation, not Daniel, not Paul, just 2 short letters that John wrote to these first century churches. And that tells us something important. If we want to understand what the Antichrist actually is, then that's where we have to go. Now, prophecy discussions have assumed for a long time that the Antichrist and the beast of Revelation, they must be the same figure. But the Bible never actually makes that connection. And when you let John speak for himself in his own words, in his own context, a very different picture starts to emerge. Let's listen to what he says in 1 John 2:18. Children, it is the last hour. And as you have heard the Antichrist is coming, so many Antichrists have come. Now sit with that for a second. John doesn't say that the Antichrist is coming someday. He says that many Antichrists have already come in his own day, in the first century. And he says their presence is how readers know that they're living in what he calls the last hour. And in the New Testament, that phrase refers to the entire period between Jesus' resurrection and his return. And John believed that the church was already in that time, which means this wasn't a warning about something reserved for some distant generation. It was already happening in John's churches in his time. So, if multiple antichrists already existed in the first century, what exactly is John talking about here? And thankfully, he answers that directly. And this is where it gets very interesting. In 1 John 2:22, he says, "Who is the liar but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist." And then in John 4:3, he says, "Every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist." John here isn't describing some political figure. He's not drawing on a prophetic timeline. He's pointing at something far more specific and far more subtle. In John's day, there were certain teachers who were spreading these distorted ideas about Jesus. Some denied that he was actually the true Messiah. Others rejected the idea that he had come in actual human flesh. And to most people, these probably sounded like some theological debates, philosophical differences, maybe even minor disagreements. But to John, they weren't minor. They struck at the very foundation of the gospel, because everything in Christianity is built on and depends entirely on who Jesus is. And here's the part that most people miss. The Greek prefix anti doesn't mean against, or doesn't mean only against. It also can mean instead of, in place of, a substitute. So the spirit of the Antichrist isn't just openly hostile towards Jesus. It's anything that replaces him, anything that takes his place in our theology, in our loyalty, and in our lives. And that's exactly what John was seeing in his churches. Not some rising political empire, but teachers slowly reshaping who Jesus was until what people were following wasn't really Jesus at all. You see, a gradual drift and a subtle substitution can lead people away from Jesus. And John wanted the church to recognize what was happening around them. Now, a lot of you might be thinking about Revelation 13. The beast, the mark, the false prophet. And I want to address that shortly. Because even in Revelation, John never uses the word Antichrist. He uses imagery like the beast, like the dragon, to describe power that demands allegiance that actually only belongs to God. And Revelation wasn't primarily written to predict the future, rather, it was written to call believers to faithfulness in the present now. And the question that Revelation keeps asking isn't who is the beast, it's who are you loyal to? Which is actually exactly where John lands his letters here that we're looking at. But if you want to go deeper into these topics in Revelation, I have links to those videos that I've done down below. So, when you put all of this together, the whole conversation starts to shift. You see, most of the energy around the Antichrist has been pointed outward to identify a future villain, to decode headlines, building prophetic timelines, and every generation has done it with total confidence. But John's concern in these verses isn't out there, it's more internal. He's asking the church to pay attention to what's happening in their own communities, in their own thinking, in their own hearts. He's asking us today, are we holding on to who Jesus actually is? Or have we slowly allowed a substitute to take his place? And here's why this question is so urgent. Because the substitution isn't always obvious. You see, not many people wake up and decide to follow a different Jesus. It happens gradually. It's a slow drift into how we talk about him, a version of Jesus that acts less of us, a version of him that's shaped more by what's culturally comfortable than what Scripture actually says. The version that's all grace and no truth, or all truth and no grace. The version that we've edited until he fits neatly inside the life that we want to live. That is the spirit of the Antichrist. Not a figure in a news, but a quiet pressure present in every generation that's pulling us away from the real thing. And John's answer to his churches 2,000 years ago, it wasn't complicated. Stay rooted in what you were taught from the beginning. Test every spirit and don't let anything, no matter how reasonable it might sound, take the place of what Christ belongs to. You see, the churches have faced this in every era, different voices, different pressures, different versions of the same drift, but the center has never moved. Jesus is the Christ. He's not just a teacher we admire, not a symbol we invoke. The Christ, the Son of God, the one the whole gospel was built on. And the question underneath everything John wrote isn't who is the Antichrist. It's simply this: who is Jesus to you? And if this kind of content is helpful for you, make sure that you're subscribed to this channel. I cover topics like this regularly, and I got a lot more coming up. And if you want to go deeper, I wrote a whole series on the end times, on prophecy, on what the Bible actually says over on my Substack. The link to that is in the description down below. And you can even dive further into this topic on the piece I wrote about the Antichrist. And one last thing, one question for you. Do you think the church spends too much time trying to identify the Antichrist and not enough time examining itself? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.